Guardians of this unceded land, to which we meet and pay my respects to elders past and present. This always was and always will be Aboriginal land. So just a few things. Tonight's session will run for around between 15 to 30 minutes. The webinar will be recorded and we'll stop recording before we open up an informal discussion. So you're welcome to submit questions anytime during the webinar itself. We'll have a little chat panel open for you. And then at the end, we'll actually pause our recording and open a bit of a deeper Q&A. So I'm thrilled to introduce tonight's guest speaker, Dr. Aakriti Gupta. She's a consultant dermatologist here in Adelaide, but she has worked all over. Now, Dr. Gupta graduated from the University of Adelaide with the Medal for Highest Overall Performance in Medicine, which is what I believe I have derived from her education so far. She's completed a specialist dermatology training here and abroad in Oxford as well in the UK, as well due to a fellowship. She's co-authored medical textbooks on botulinum toxin use and facial assessment and published extensively in medical education and skin oncology. So currently she's a board member of the Australasian Society of Cosmetic and Procedural Dermatologists, Associate Editor of Opinions and Progress in Cosmetic Dermatology, and she's part of the national expert team for All About Acne. I hope I've gotten that correct so far, Aakriti. There's a lot to kind of churn out there.
No, thanks for the really generous introduction, Lara. Looking forward to getting started.
Yeah,
Are you happy for me to share my screen and then I can get
sure.
started? Perfect. Great. Perfect. Um, can you see that okay?
Yes.
Yeah, great. So, hi everyone, and thanks again, Lara, for inviting me and for the really generous introduction. We're going to run through. So this is actually based on a article that I wrote for Opinions and Progress in Cosmetic Dermatology, and as Lara said, very, very happy to take questions. I might end up answering some of them as we go along. So maybe like Lara said, you can definitely write some things in the chat box, but we'll probably get into that a little bit more towards the end of the talk, just in case it is covered a little bit later today. So just by way of introduction, I think the continuing growth of the skincare industry, coupled with the impact of sort of social media skin influencers, I think has really increased interest in trying to determine whether or not there is an ideal skincare routine. And I think as a result, as aesthetic professionals, both dermal clinicians and dermatologists, we are increasingly called upon to navigate both product selection as well as formulate personalized skincare routines. These are just my disclosures. So today I really just want to go through some of the basics, some things I'm sure you're well familiar with, including evidence-based recommendations around the timing and layering of products, the role of various ancillary skincare products. And then in the second half of my talk, I just want to debunk a lot of the common skincare myths derived from a lot of the questions that come up during my clinical consultations. Just in terms of the very beginnings, again, as dermal clinicians, you're well versed in a lot of this, but I think given the increasing complexity of skincare products, I think it is important to know how to layer products well. And the correct order is to start by cleansing and followed by an active serum if you're using this. An eye cream obviously is optional, but you can use that next if you wanted to, followed by a moisturizer to help lock in all your actives, and then obviously a sunscreen in the morning. I think probably what's more important is to sort of understand how to layer different skincare actives. And I think it's really useful to be aware of a product's pH. So in particular, it's important to note that products that have high levels of acids, so pH of less than 4, and that can include products that have L-ascorbic acid, AHAs, BHAs, for example. In particular, they tend to react with retinols and niacinamide and make them less effective. And it's important to understand that that's mainly a pH issue rather than being so much an issue in terms of a specific ingredient. So, for example, niacinamide, it can be safely combined with ascorbyl glucoside, which is a precursor to L-ascorbic acid, but not directly with L-ascorbic acid, otherwise it becomes less effective. So I think it's helpful to have a think a little bit about pH and chemistry when, particularly with patients that are using multiple actives as part of their skincare routine. There are certain products that are better to use in the morning compared to the evening. So vitamin C in general, as you are probably well aware, functions mainly as a potent antioxidant. So really, because it's trying to protect our skin cells from free radicals that are generated by exposure to UV radiation and pollution, it's thought that by using it in the morning, we essentially develop a reservoir of antioxidants, and they help to in turn reduce the reactive oxygen species induced damage that can occur during the day. Sunscreen obviously is a must, and there are different types of sunscreen. So broadly, we categorize them as being either organic or chemical sunscreens, or minerals or physical sunscreens. And often that comes down to personal preference in terms of texture and tint. When a sunscreen says that it's broad spectrum, it really just means it protects against both UVA and UVB. And in Australia, we generally prefer sunscreens with an SPF of 50 plus. And I'll talk a little bit more about sunscreens later on, given it has been very topical recently with the recent Choice publication as well. The other thing I'll just add in is that in general, if I do see patients with pigmentary concerns like melasma, I do tend to favour physical sunscreens, partly just because they protect against visible light, which may have a role in pigment production as well. So that's probably one situation where I tend to prefer physical sunscreens to chemical sunscreens. But in general, the best sunscreen is going to be the one the person will apply and also reapply throughout the day. We use our vitamin A based products, so retinols and prescription topical retinoids, in the evening. And that's for two main reasons. One is that they do increase the skin sensitivity to UV, but also they do undergo photodegradation. So they degrade on exposure to sunlight, so makes it in turn makes them less effective. And we think that vitamins A help with sort of overnight regeneration as well, because they help to regulate the production of keratinocytes as well as stimulate collagen production. In terms of vitamin B3, I mean, this is a bit more flexible. I mean, it often is used in the evenings. It can be safely layered with most forms of vitamin A. In fact, we think they often work synergistically together because they help to both of them help to improve uneven skin tone and also reduce fine lines. But it is photostable, so it doesn't really matter. It can be used in the morning and or in the evening. It just depends a little bit on the other cosmeceuticals that are being used. But it is photostable, so I'm not too stressed about that so much. In terms of ancillary skincare products, so by this I really am referring to additional skincare products that are often used to enhance a skincare routine. So probably the most commonly used ancillary skincare products are exfoliants. Typically, they tend to be used once or twice a week, and they can be physical or chemical. So physical exfoliants or scrubs, they're manually massaged into the skin, and they are used to dislodge the corneocytes or your dead skin cells. And in turn, that improves the skin's sort of visual and tactile smoothness. And that in turn improves light reflection from the skin surface. And that's perceived as an improvement in both the skin's radiance and luminosity. Some of the common ingredients that are used in scrubs include aluminium oxide, ground fruit pits. Polyethylene beads used to be used a lot more, but there have been increasing environmental concerns about this. So you'll see this a lot less now in products. In fact, it is banned in certain areas. And my main sort of word of caution about exfoliants is just being mindful about overuse, because when they're used either too frequently or aggressively, they can actually damage the skin barrier function, and it can cause an increase in skin sensitivity as well as promote the formation of milia. In terms of chemical exfoliants, they broadly fall into three main categories. We're probably most familiar with alpha hydroxy acids, and there's a whole range of them, including glycolic acid, lactic acids, and the more common ones. But they're known as fruit acids because they naturally occur and are found in fruits and foods. And they are thought to provide anti-aging benefits essentially by stimulating exfoliation and skin renewal. So the one of the advantages of AHAs specifically is that they not only actually remove the dead surface skin cells of the stratum corneum, but they also help to stimulate the production of glycosaminoglycans and collagens. That's different to BHAs, which we'll talk about in a minute. So salicylic acid is the prototypical BHA, and it's useful particularly in acne-prone skin. But unlike your AHAs, it can actually result in dermal thinning. So, so that's important just to be aware of as well. And then there are newer generation AHAs, and they include polyhydroxy acids or PHAs and bionic acids or bionics. And they are more suitable for sensitive skin, and they often also have additional benefits like improving the skin barrier and also often providing antioxidant benefits. So it's quite exciting to see that space evolve and see new ingredients hit the market that are, I guess, a little bit more sophisticated and able to be, able to offer some options for people that have more sensitive skin as well. When it comes to sort of face masks, broadly, again, there's probably three main categories. Face masks generally, I mean, there are some overnight masks, but in general, they're designed to be used for sort of between, 5 to 30 minutes on the skin. Clay masks can be helpful for acne-prone skin. I mean, they temporarily help to essentially absorb oil. Polymer masks are the popular sheet masks, and essentially they work to temporarily increase skin moisture and hydration by providing occlusion. I think the botanical face masks, they're mainly made up of dried plant ingredients. And so they probably provide more sort of relaxing and aromatic benefits rather than necessarily a sustained improvement in the skin. But they can certainly temporarily increase moisture and provide a nice sort of relaxing activity, but probably unlikely to affect skin tone or texture in the long term. Toners, so they're also known as astringents, but essentially they're designed to be used either following a cleanser or in place of a classic or standard detergent-based cleanser. To be honest, I mean, when an effective cleanser is used, toners are really, I think, a bit of an optional step in a skincare routine rather than being seen of as being a necessity. There are a lot of different formulations based on the person's skin type, and probably one of the biggest differences is really the concentration of alcohol. So you'll find that the formulations or the toner formulations designed for oily or acne skin tend to have higher alcohol concentrations. And then there tend to be alcohol-free formulations available for people that have dry skin. And these often also actually contain humectants like propylene glycol in them to help improve hydration. And then there are also exfoliating toners, and they may include alpha hydroxy acids like glycolic acids. So, not an essential step necessarily, but worth understanding where they may fit into a person's skincare routine, where they may be of value there as well. So I've sort of whizzed through, I guess, some of those, some of the basics in terms of skincare. And then for the second half of my talk, I really just want to focus on debunking a lot of common skincare myths because there's so much on social media. I'm sure you, like me, also get lots of questions from patients about these things. I think it's worth having a framework about how to answer some of the questions that come up. So one thing that's really big, especially on social media, is about, all natural skincare. So I wanted to tackle this one a little bit and just say, look, the first thing to understand is that the term all natural really is a marketing label. It's not a meaningful indicator of safety or efficacy. So typically what that term is referring to is active ingredients that are derived from plants and minerals. But if you think about it, I mean, virtually everything that we encounter is essentially originating from natural materials found on Earth. So cosmetics in Australia are only regulated by the TGA when they make therapeutic claims. So, like sunscreens, for example. But if it's not making a therapeutic claim, then they're subject to industrial standards rather than medical. So they're regulated in terms of how they're made rather than what they do. So in Australia, the vast majority of cosmetic products, even if they're described as being natural or organic, they are actually regulated as industrial chemicals due to the processes used to extract naturally occurring chemicals from their source. Do you have a question, Alara?
I do. We've just had a question come through. We've got somebody saying, would love to know, would love it if the research on mixing vitamin C and vitamin B can be shared. And to clarify, if an exfoliating acid is above a pH of 4, is it okay to combine with a retinol?
So hang on. So the first part was about L-ascorbic acid and
Yep. Mixing L-ascorbic acid or vitamin C's with vitamin B.
Mhm.
Like, what is the research there at the moment? What is that saying?
It's a chemical thing. So I don't know if you've come across any of Zoe Dralos's textbook. So she's like the one of the dermatologists, like cosmetic gurus in cosmeceutical guru in the world. But you'll find that even in her textbooks, so it's quite well established. So as I mentioned, it's not all forms of vitamin C. It's specifically with L-ascorbic acid, and you'll find that a lot of the newer formulations of vitamin C have other precursors to L-ascorbic acid, like ascorbyl glucoside, and what happens when you layer those is that you don't have that same reaction. So you can safely combine them in that setting, but otherwise you prefer to separate them out. So if you're using a formulation that's made with L-ascorbic acid, it's best not to use that at the same time of day as niacinamide. Does that tackle that part of that question?
So it does.
Yeah.
Is there an ideal layering technique? Let's just say you found a type of vitamin C that is, it's basically encapsulated or it's delivered in a way that's acceptable with a vitamin B.
Yeah.
What would you like on the skin first?
I don't think that really matters, to be completely honest. Like, I think if they're
Okay.
chemically compatible, it doesn't matter whether the B goes on or the C goes on. But like I said to you, I generally use the vitamin C's in the morning, and then usually I'll layer like the B3 and your retinols at night safely together because for the vast majority of the time that works fine.
Okay, fantastic. And just a second part of that beautiful question, we've
Yeah.
got if an exfoliating acid is above a pH of 4, is it okay to combine with a retinol?
So usually with like, do you mean like in a toner, for example? Because I mean, if that's only on the skin temporarily, and then you're rinsing it off and then following it with retinol, I mean, that's not a problem. You just might irritate the skin a little bit, but there's not
Mhm.
like a chemical issue with it. It's more so with your leave-on products.
Okay, so just to clarify, like let's say
Mhm.
if a patient wasn't using a toner, but they put on an exfoliant leave-on, let's say like a lactic acid product,
Hmm.
after that, could they put on a retinol or would that
They
still be sufficient?
could, but again, if people are using both exfoliants and retinols, I would often because they're only going to use their exfoliating toner or exfoliant usually a couple of times a week. So normally I would encourage them to skip their retinol that night just to avoid irritating the skin.
Okay,
Does
fantastic.
that make sense? It's not so much a chemical issue, it's more about avoiding skin irritation.
Okay.
Because sometimes if you put too many things that have the potential to dry and strip the skin, that can result in skin irritation. So then so given that they're only going to use that once, twice a week, I would just skip the retinol that night.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much for that, Aakriti.
That's all good. So just coming back to the natural skincare thing. So I was just going to say the other thing I think just to understand is that the origin of the ingredient doesn't necessarily determine its safety. So a good example is iron oxide pigments, which are quite commonly used in cosmetics, whether that's in makeup or even certain sunscreens. But the ones that are used in cosmetic products are actually normally synthesized because iron oxides that are naturally derived can usually contain high levels of toxic heavy metals. So um, I guess I just wanted to reiterate that all natural, it doesn't mean that's necessarily safer, at least in the realm of skincare. And in fact, many sort of all natural products have got quite high levels of botanical ingredients in them, which are a leading cause of both allergic and irritant contact dermatitis. I think it's helpful when when you've got patients in front of you that are sort of asking a bit about sort of a lot of the very well-established skincare brands versus some, all natural remedies. It's helpful to have a bit of a framework about how you might be able to help alleviate some of their concerns around that as well. Um, so, um, People often ask about whether cosmeceuticals truly have the potential to improve facial aging. And so I think for that, I would just say there's a couple of points to make. Firstly, that cosmeceuticals primarily designed to improve the appearance of facial aging. The claims when it comes to cosmeceuticals are classified as being cosmetic rather than being pharmaceutical. So, as I mentioned before, the TGA does not evaluate cosmetics unless they're making therapeutic claims. And that's why you often see when you see the wording of cosmeceuticals, they'll often say things like, these can visibly correct dark spots rather than fade pigmentation, or it can target acne prone skin rather than improving acne. So having said that, so even though that's how cosmeceuticals are regulated, I do think that the science of cosmeceuticals has advanced a lot in recent years, and many active ingredients do actually work at a cellular level. But for the purpose of that question, any claims that deal with how an active ingredient alters the look or appearance of the skin rather than the function of it. So they're not considered a replacement, I guess, for, treatment of some of those medical skin concerns, but they can certainly have a role as an adjunctive treatment and often can clinically support other treatments. Similarly, when people ask about moisturizers and can they improve, can they remove wrinkles? Well, certainly they can reduce the appearance of wrinkles, and that's primarily by increasing skin hydration. So, all moisturizers contain some sort of occlusive ingredient, whether that's petrolatum, mineral oils, or dimethicone, and they essentially are reducing your transepidermal water loss, and that in turn improves the skin's water content and turgor. Some moisturizers are also quite clever. They have what are known as wrinkle blurring properties. And so usually that includes like little silicone gels, that little particles that basically fill in your wrinkle crevices. And then they also usually have like light reflective particles that help to reduce the visible depth of the wrinkles. So even though obviously that can result in significant improvement in the appearance of wrinkles, it is based on optical effects, so only last as long as the moisturizer is on the skin. Alara.
Okay, I'm not sure when the best time to kind of come through with my questions, but I've
That's
had another
okay.
question
That's
come
all
through.
right. Are they? I mean, I can't see them, so that might be why.
No worries. So
Yeah,
I've got one. What is your thought about the common saying vitamin C causes acne?
I don't think vitamin C causes acne. Was
Do
that the
you
question?
believe that there are some forms of vitamin C that can exacerbate the appearance of acne?
Well, it probably depends what else is in it, but I don't think vitamin C as an ingredient causes acne. It's an antioxidant. That's all it really is. I guess it just depends what else is in the formulation. Like, is it in an occlusive sort of base? Is it in an oil base? Like, is there something else in it that's causing
Mm.
causing it? But I don't think vitamin C as an ingredient it causes acne.
Interesting. I do find, now you can tell me what you come across in your practice.
Yeah.
Certain ethnic skin types, for example, my Italian cohort of patients typically
Hmm.
can't handle vitamin C, they're acne prone.
Hmm.
Do you come across any such things as well with regards to different ethnicities?
In terms of, sorry, is this still about vitamin C
Vitamin C, yes,
causing
yes,
acne?
yes.
Not usually. Like, I think it's usually, I mean, I see lots of irritation and lots of perioral dermatitis from acne.
Hmm.
Sorry, from perioral dermatitis from forms of vitamin C. And I wonder sometimes people mistake that themselves as thinking that they've caused themselves acne, but it's always, I mean, all the cases that I've seen of sort of papules in the context of a vitamin C serum or cream have been a perioral dermatitis. So usually from skin irritation rather than because of skin occlusion resulting in acne.
Okay, thank you so much for clarifying that. I've got one last question for you,
Oh,
and
good.
then I'll give you a little break and then I'll get in with some more.
That's
Now,
good.
another clinician has come through and she's got a question regarding natural skincare.
Oh,
Now,
yeah. Yeah.
yep, how have you been approaching patients that are set on using apps like Yucca to determine whether they believe a product is safe while still valuing their concerns, but also in a way that helps to reassure them?
Yeah. What was the app? I'm not sure if I've come across that one.
YUKA, and it's basically one of those you kind of scan a product or you look up a product and it's going to bring up whether ingredient deck is clean or quote unquote dirty, and then they
Right.
kind of start grading that. So there's that now like the new, I guess, run of patients who have got that
Yeah.
running in the background when they come into their consultations, and they're
I
like, well, I heard this was great because it's got a great score on this app.
Uh-huh. They're probably not making it to a medical dermatologist. So,
No.
because I think if they're going down those pathways, I'm not sure how much they're going to be up for medical advice. So look, I'm not sure. I haven't come across that app specifically. I think it's tricky and it depends on what I'm seeing a patient for. I think you do have to build a good rapport with patients and sometimes I mean, I often see people, for example, with eczema, and they're using some sort of, moisturizer that seems to be working for their skin. And even though sometimes, like, you'll look at the ingredient list and be like, "Gosh, this has got so many botanicals and things in it." Sometimes it's better just to get them on side and treat, still treat them actively. And it might be something that we can look at down the track, like once they've sort of got their eczema under control, they've come back to see me for follow up, and they're feeling, I guess, they've got confidence in you. Then you might be able to be like, look, I think that in terms of reducing recurrence risk, it may be worth switching out something that's a bit blander, and give them some samples to trial some examples. Like, I think it's hard because I think you've got to acknowledge a person's beliefs, and you're not going to change that necessarily on the initial review that you have with them. So you've got to be sensitive to that as well. And it's not as though I think that natural skincare is bad. It's just that I'm just trying to make the point that it's not considered necessarily to be safer than so many well-established skincare, brands that are on the market that are really well regulated, and have had significant safety testing. So it's not sort of necessarily pitching one against the other. It's more about, I guess, understanding how that fits in, and how you can, how you can frame it to patients that come and see you. Does that answer that question?
It does. Thank you so much.
No, that's okay. That's all good. Um, I think the other thing that often comes up relates to, did I miss a slide? No. That often comes up is also about expense of skincare products. And often, like, and this often comes up because people ask recommendations, and often, certainly I know that our practices, we often will often give patients options that are at different price points rather than just at one price point. And it's worth noting that, interestingly, often the most expensive aspects of a moisturizer, for example, are the fragrance, which is often patented, and the packaging. So it's worth sometimes putting that into context for patients as well, because really at its core, the main ingredients that a moisturizer needs really are some sort of occlusive agent, a humectant, and a silicon-based ingredient. Having said that, there are so many formulations now in modern moisturizers that provide benefits beyond hydration, and that can obviously contribute to expense and quality. And so that might include things like niacinamide and panthenol or vitamin B5 for their soothing and anti-inflammatory properties, or tocopherol, which is vitamin E for its antioxidant properties. So I think that there are more sophisticated moisturizers, and sometimes the expense may be justified. Understanding that you might use that in place of a serum because it has its additional benefits in it too. The other thing, though, that I've really noticed, especially in recent years, is this increasing use of sort of unique or rare ingredients, and that they have included all sorts of things, including things like saffron, licorice root extract, gold, diamond powder, and really, it's they're marketed as providing additional skin benefits. But to be able to assess the true effectiveness of ingredients like that, we really do need double-blind vehicle-controlled studies. And for those ingredients, it's still lacking in the current literature. I'm sure most of you can guess which one I'm talking about, but there is a high-end skincare range which features rare caviar that's sourced from the endangered beluga sturgeon. And the reason it's so expensive is partly because of the rarity of the sturgeon. So the caviar has to be harvested fresh during the natural spawning process, and then it needs to be immediately processed to the lab for processing. So that's the primary reason why it's so expensive, but I'm not sure if it necessarily translates into a significant difference in efficacy without there being a head-to-head vehicle-controlled study to be able to demonstrate that. The other thing I just want to talk a little bit about is dietary antioxidants, because it's something that I'm often asked in clinic, because often there are both oral and topical forms of certain vitamins. So we know that that oxidative stress occurs when there's an imbalance between the production of reactive oxygen species and in our antioxidant defenses. And we know that oxidative stress is one of the key factors when it comes to skin aging. But the role of all the evidence regarding dietary antioxidants and skin aging has been quite mixed. So even though the role of dietary antioxidants is actually quite well established in fields like cardiovascular and neurological medicine, the impact on skin health is still being researched. And I think there are certain effects of topical vitamins that can't be replicated in oral form. So for example, topical vitamin E, that's often used as an emollient, so it helps to improve skin texture and smoothness. Whereas orally, vitamin E functions as an antioxidant, but it doesn't tend to enhance skin hydration. So I think that's just an example to illustrate that different forms of vitamins, whether they're topical or oral, can provide distinct benefits. The other thing I've been asked about quite recently is a bit about Botox in a bottle. So these are, just to explain what they are, so these are cosmeceuticals with peptides that aim to relax facial muscles at the neuromuscular junction. One of the most commonly used neurotransmitter peptides is adrenaline, and thought to disrupt the release of acetylcholine by destabilizing the protein complex that's involved. To put into context, realistically, for a neuromuscular peptide to be effective, it needs to be able to achieve three key things. So first, it needs to actually be able to penetrate deep enough to reach the neuromuscular junction. It then needs to reach a sufficient concentration at that depth to create a visible difference. And it needs to remain in place long enough to produce a sustained effect. So achieving those formulations, achieving that in a topical formulation is quite challenging. So I think it's an area of ongoing research, and we still need more clinical trials to verify efficacy. A lot of the products that I've seen that contain arduraline also have other ingredients in them that already have a well-established role in reducing the appearance of wrinkles. And so the additional benefit of including arduraline is unclear. So I think it'll be really interesting to watch this space. Like it's an exciting area to see whether or not it can serve as an adjunct to clinical treatment, whether it can extend, it can extend how long people can have between treatments. But at the moment, the evidence is still a little bit mixed there. For the last couple of slides, I just wanted to talk a little bit about sunscreen controversies, especially with things like SPF and also about nanoparticles. So I've put this table up to sort of better explain how SPF correlates with UVB protection. So SPF or sun protection factor is not an absolute protection rating. It's a relative measure of a sunscreen's ability to prevent sunburn. So, for example, if an SPF 15 sunscreen is correctly used by an individual, in theory, they can stay in the sun 15 times longer before they would experience a sunburn compared to if they weren't using that sunscreen. It's important to know that SPF is specifically a measure of UVB protection, not UVA. And as the SPF further increases, as you can see in the table, the sort of percentage increase in UVB protection is less marked. So if we look at that table, you can see that a sunscreen that has an SPF as low as 4 blocks about 75% of UVB radiation, whereas a sunscreen with an SPF of 15 blocks 93%. So that's quite a significant difference. Whereas when you then double the SPF to say 30, there's actually a much smaller increase in UVB protection. So it increases only really by 4%. So one of the reasons, though, that we tend to recommend higher SPFs is because the real life application of a sunscreen is often significantly less than the amounts that are used during product testing. And often also because people may not apply the sunscreen evenly, or it might just over the course of the day as well, it tends to migrate. There may well be an incomplete sunscreen film over the skin surface. And so as a result, the sunscreen may not deliver the labeled amount of SPF sun protection. So just to reiterate really that frequent reapplication still remains key in terms of achieving adequate sun protection. And then finally, I just wanted to touch on nanoparticles because patients often ask about this. So there are sort of two concerns about the use of nanoparticles. So the first is that reactive oxygen species may form metal oxide nanoparticles on exposure to UV. And there's concern about whether those may be cytotoxic and carcinogenic. And then the second concern relates to whether these nanoparticles can actually penetrate the epidermis and reach the human bloodstream and potentially then cause toxicity with long-term use. So to address that, the first thing to say is that both the in vivo and in vitro studies to date have shown that the nanoparticles remain confined to the non-viables, the dead keratinized layer of the epidermis or the stratum corneum after topical application, even in situations where skin barrier function has been disrupted. And furthermore, manufacturers now coat nanoparticles with compounds like aluminium oxide to reduce the formation of reactive oxygen species and prevent particles from adhering to skin cells. The TGA released a literature review about this as well. So they looked at the safety of titanium dioxide and zinc oxide nanoparticles in sunscreens. and also concluded that the evidence does not support that titanium dioxide or zinc oxide reach the general circulation. So that's helpful as well, given that a lot of the new mineral formulations that don't have like a sticky white residue often do have these formulations as nanoparticles, which helps to improve, obviously, the sort of feel the feel of the sunscreens and therefore often improves compliance. So it's good to know the research that's happened in that space as well. So really, in summary, I think in an industry which is, driven by the sort of promise of beauty ideals, distinguishing scientific fact from marketing fiction can be quite difficult. So hopefully by focusing on some of those key elements in skincare, including product selection, layering, and addressing some common misconceptions, I hope that helps you sort of better address the myriad of skincare questions I'm sure you get from your patients. I hope you feel your heart sink a little bit less when they open up that big bag of skincare that they've brought in to show you. Thank you for joining. And if there are any more questions, I'm really happy to take them.
Oh, amazing. So thank you for joining us, everybody, tonight. I really appreciate you coming along. So I'm just going to pause the webinar recording here, and we're going to continue our discussion further on.